Michael Jordan watches a charity lie about its donations. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The story of Michael Jordan's rise from a promising college star to the face of the NBA is one of hard work, determination, and the relentless pursuit of greatness. It began in the small town of Wilmington, North Carolina, where Michael's competitive nature was nurtured by his family. His father, James Jordan, was a major influence, pushing Michael to compete at everything, whether it was basketball or a simple game of cards. It was clear early on that Michael Jordan wasn't just another talented athlete. He was someone who thrived under pressure, someone who wasn't satisfied unless he was at the top. By the time he reached the University of North Carolina in 1981, Michael had already earned a reputation for his fierce drive and work ethic. In his freshman year, he hit a game-winning shot in the 1982 NCAA championship game against Georgetown. It was a defining moment in his career, and it cemented his belief that he had the ability to change the game. But even with all his natural talent, Jordan knew that success wasn't guaranteed. It would take years of sacrifice, failure, and self-improvement to get where he wanted to go. When Jordan declared for the NBA draft in 1984, he was selected by the Chicago Bulls as the third overall pick. The city of Chicago, hungry for a sports hero, had no idea just how transformative this young man would be. The Bulls had struggled for years to become a competitive team, but Michael Jordan changed everything the moment he stepped onto the court. His combination of speed, athleticism, and basketball IQ was unmatched, and he quickly became the face of the franchise. In his early years, the team was built around Jordan's individual brilliance. He was a one-man show, able to score at will and make plays that left fans and opponents alike in awe. But Jordan's early success wasn't without its challenges. The Bulls had trouble surrounding him with enough talent to make a serious championship run. It wasn't until the arrival of coach Phil Jackson in 1989 that the team began to transform. Jackson's triangle offense helped Jordan develop his game beyond just scoring, focusing on teamwork and ball movement, while also giving Jordan the space to be the leader he was destined to be. The Bulls slowly started to rise in the standings, but it was clear that Jordan's individual greatness wasn't enough to win championships on its own. In 1991, the team added Scottie Pippen, a versatile forward who would become Jordan's right-hand man. Pippen's defense, playmaking, and ability to take pressure off Jordan made him the perfect complement to the superstar. The duo quickly formed one of the most dominant partnerships in NBA history, and in 1991, they finally captured their first NBA championship. Jordan was named Finals MVP, and the team had found the formula for success. The early years of Jordan's career were full of highs and lows, but they set the stage for what would be the most successful era in Chicago Bulls history. Through it all, Michael Jordan remained steadfast in his commitment to being the best. His intense work ethic, his refusal to back down from any challenge, and his passion for the game were qualities that defined him, not just as a player, but as a person. His mindset, often referred to as the Jordan mentality, became a blueprint for success, not just in basketball, but in every aspect of life. In the years that followed, Jordan would go on to win 5 more NBA championships, becoming a global icon and solidifying his place as the greatest player to ever play the game. But with his rise to superstardom came a level of responsibility. Jordan had always known the importance of being a role model, but as his influence grew, so did his desire to use his platform for more than just basketball. In the early 1990s, Jordan began to expand his influence beyond the basketball court. His partnership with Nike, which created the iconic Air Jordan brand, made him one of the most marketable athletes in the world. The shoes became a symbol of status, style, and athletic excellence, and Jordan's face graced advertisements, billboards, and magazines across the globe. He had become more than just a basketball player. He was a global icon, a figure who transcended sports. But even as Jordan's fame and wealth grew, he remained committed to giving back. He had always believed in helping others, particularly kids who faced the kind of struggles he had growing up. His charitable work started small, but over time, he used his platform to support a variety of causes. One of the most notable was his work with youth basketball programs, where he donated money, time, and resources to provide opportunities for underprivileged kids. He had a deep desire to inspire the next generation of players, to give them the same opportunities he had been given. Jordan's charity work wasn't limited to just basketball. He became involved in various philanthropic efforts, focusing on education, health, and community development. It was clear that Jordan wanted to make a difference, and as his success continued to grow, so did his ability to influence change. However, with his growing influence came the inevitable complications. Not all of Jordan's charitable efforts were as transparent as he hoped, and there were organizations that would take advantage of his name and status for their own benefit. One such group was a charity that had been using Jordan's name to raise funds under the guise of helping kids in Chicago. As the years went on, Jordan became more aware of the discrepancies within this charity, and it eventually became a source of tension for him. His commitment to giving back had been sincere, but seeing his name used by an organization that wasn't living up to its promises would test his resolve in ways he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't long before Jordan realized that the charity wasn't using the funds for the children it claimed to support. The deception went deeper than he could have ever imagined, and as his suspicions grew, so did his anger. Jordan's name, his reputation, and his legacy were being misused for personal gain, and that was something he could not ignore. His public stance on integrity and fairness had always been a cornerstone of his persona, and now, the man who had conquered the basketball world was faced with the challenge of confronting an issue that would not only impact his legacy but could potentially change the way he viewed his entire philanthropic approach. The tensions were building, and Jordan was preparing to take action. This was no longer just about basketball or championships. It was about standing up for what was right and ensuring that his name and influence weren't being used to exploit the very people he had worked so hard to help. Little did he know, the dramatic confrontation that would unfold on live television was about to change everything. The story was about to take a dramatic turn, and Michael Jordan, ever the competitor, was preparing for his greatest challenge off the court, exposing the truth and fighting for the kids who had been denied the help they deserved. Michael Jordan had reached the peak of success. He was the face of the NBA, a global icon whose name was synonymous with basketball excellence. But beyond the courts, his brand was far more than just endorsements and sneaker deals. As Jordan's fame grew, so did his sense of responsibility. He was aware of the influence his image carried and the opportunities it gave him to make a difference in the world. It was not enough for him to be known only as a player, he wanted to be known as someone who used his platform to give back. Jordan's path into philanthropy was not something that happened overnight. It began with his desire to help children. Having grown up in a modest household, he knew what it was like to face obstacles and he understood the value of opportunity. His early charitable efforts were driven by a genuine desire to create better futures for underprivileged youth, particularly in the city of Chicago, where his rise to fame began. The city had embraced him as their own, and Jordan felt a sense of loyalty to give back to the community that had supported him during his rise to stardom. The first charity he became involved in was a youth basketball program that offered scholarships and mentorship for children in Chicago's underserved communities. The program was designed to provide opportunities for kids to develop their skills and pursue their passions, much like Jordan had been able to do when he was young. It was an initiative that Jordan believed in wholeheartedly, and he invested both his time and money into making sure it succeeded. He attended events, hosted basketball camps, and often spoke about the importance of sports as a way to build character and discipline. But as his involvement in various charitable efforts expanded, so did the complexity of the landscape. Jordan was approached by many different organizations looking for his endorsement, using his name and reputation to raise funds for causes ranging from childhood education to health initiatives. The appeal of his involvement was undeniable. His name carried weight, and organizations knew that having his endorsement would significantly boost their credibility and fundraising efforts. For Jordan, these opportunities were seen as a way to amplify his impact. However, as he got more involved, the reality of the charitable world became more complicated. In the early stages, Jordan was largely a figurehead. He appeared at charity events, signed autographs, and made donations, but he didn't always have the time or resources to deeply vet every cause. He trusted the people around him, his managers, advisors, and the teams running the organizations, to ensure that the money being raised was going to the right places. After all, he was still in the midst of his basketball career, and his time was stretched thin with training, traveling, and playing. But as the years went on, Jordan began to notice that not all of the organizations he was associated with were as transparent or as accountable as they should be. One of the most prominent examples of this came with the rise of a charity that had begun using Jordan's name to attract donations for children in need. The organization, which claimed to provide resources for underprivileged youth, gained traction quickly after associating itself with Jordan. His name alone brought in substantial donations from well-meaning people who believed in the cause. Jordan was initially unaware of the charity's shady practices, as everything seemed legitimate on the surface. The team behind the organization knew how to market themselves well, and their message of helping kids seemed noble. But as time went on, Jordan began to hear rumblings that all wasn't as it seemed. Whispers about the misuse of funds and questionable practices started circulating within his inner circle. Jordan had heard stories about some charity leaders living extravagant lifestyles, attending galas, and taking expensive trips, all while claiming to support the kids back in Chicago. When Jordan inquired about the charity's operations, the answers were often vague or evasive. Something didn't sit right with him, and his concerns grew deeper with each passing month. While Jordan was used to facing challenges on the basketball court, this situation was different. He had always prided himself on being a leader, not just as a player but also as a person who made a positive impact on the world. The idea that someone might be using his name and image for their own gain struck him deeply. He knew that his reputation and legacy were on the line, and it became clear that something had to be done. The tipping point came during a live, televised fundraising event organized by the charity. Jordan had agreed to appear, as he had done with many other events in the past. His presence was expected to bring in donations, and the night had been carefully orchestrated to raise as much money as possible. Everything seemed fine at first. The gala was filled with high-profile donors, and the event was covered by local and national news outlets. It was an elegant affair with celebrities and corporate sponsors, all pledging their support for the cause. However, during the live broadcast, Jordan's suspicions about the charity's operations were confirmed. As he sat in the audience, listening to the charity leaders make their speeches about the impact their donations would have on kids, Jordan began to see discrepancies. The more the organizers spoke about the progress they had made and the work they had done, the more Jordan realized that the funds raised were not going where they were supposed to. It was all an act, an elaborate performance designed to hide the truth. Jordan, who had always valued honesty and integrity, knew that he could not let this go. He had spent years cultivating an image of reliability, and he could not stand by and watch this charity exploit the very people it was supposed to help. His internal conflict grew. He wanted to stay silent, to avoid the drama, but as the evening wore on, he became increasingly unsettled by the lies being broadcast to the world. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about the kids who were promised opportunities that they would never receive. He couldn't allow this to continue under the guise of his name. The tension in Jordan's mind mounted. The live event, once a celebration of goodwill, was now a battleground for his integrity. Should he speak up and risk causing a scene, or should he quietly distance himself from the charity and let the situation unfold without his involvement? The decision was difficult, but in the end, Jordan knew there was only one path forward. He had always believed in standing up for what was right, and this was no different. As the night drew on, Jordan made up his mind. He would take the microphone and address the public. The moment he stepped up to the stage, the room fell silent. Jordan was known for his composure, but there was something different in his voice that night. As he addressed the crowd, it was clear that the situation was about to take a dramatic turn. Jordan wasn't there just to talk about basketball or to offer another inspiring speech. He was there to confront the lies, to expose the truth, and to call out the charity for its fraudulent activities. What happened next would not only change the lives of those involved but would redefine Jordan's role in the world of philanthropy. The story of Michael Jordan confronting the truth behind the charity's lies had just begun, and the drama that unfolded from that moment would have lasting consequences for Jordan, for the charity, and for the kids who were promised a better future. The evening had started like any other charity event, filled with the promise of goodwill, the excitement of high-profile donors, and the collective hope that the night would raise substantial funds to help underprivileged children. The charity gala, hosted live on television, had every element of a successful fundraiser: the glitz, the glamour, the speeches about hope and opportunity. But beneath the surface, Michael Jordan was beginning to sense something wasn't right. He had been to many charity events throughout his career, each time walking into a carefully orchestrated environment where he was expected to smile, speak on behalf of the cause, and use his name to raise money. However, as he sat at the event, surrounded by affluent supporters, Jordan's suspicion began to grow. He had heard the claims made by the charity's leaders about the impact of their work, how they had helped thousands of kids, how they had provided access to education and sports programs for youth in Chicago. Yet, the more he listened, the more disjointed the claims seemed. There was something off about their rhetoric, the way they spoke of their progress. It didn't add up. Jordan, as perceptive as he was, had learned throughout his career to trust his gut instinct. Something about this organization didn't sit right with him. The signs of mismanagement and corruption had been there for months, hidden beneath layers of public goodwill. The charity had boasted about their use of funds, claiming that a significant portion of the donations were directed toward the children they promised to help. Yet, Jordan began to hear whispers from others in the room about discrepancies, and about the lavish lifestyles of the charity's leaders. Rumors had been circulating for a while that some of the funds raised were being diverted elsewhere, specifically, to cover the personal expenses of the charity's high-ranking staff. As the night went on, Jordan's suspicions turned into certainty. He began to connect the dots. Conversations he had overheard, discrepancies in the speeches being delivered, and, most troubling of all, a lack of clear answers from the charity's executives started to paint a disturbing picture. The more he looked around the event, the more he realized that something was wrong. The glamorous affair, with its high-end sponsors and well-dressed attendees, seemed more like a PR spectacle than an authentic charitable effort. The question gnawed at him: where was the money going? Was it actually going to the kids, as they had promised, or was it being funneled into the pockets of the very people who were supposed to be making a difference? Jordan's frustration grew as the evening wore on. He couldn't ignore what he was witnessing, a charity claiming to change lives, yet offering nothing more than empty promises. These were not the values Jordan had always stood for. He had worked his entire life to inspire others, to build a legacy beyond basketball, to give back to those who had supported him. But this was something entirely different. The leaders of this charity were using his name, leveraging his reputation, to collect donations under false pretenses. It was a betrayal, not just to the children the organization was supposed to serve, but to Jordan, who had been unknowingly complicit in this scam. The charity leaders' promises rang hollow in his ears as he watched them accept donations, thank sponsors, and bask in the applause of the crowd. All the while, Jordan knew the truth. None of it was real. This wasn't about helping kids, this was about using his name for personal gain. His blood boiled. He had always believed in giving back and in the power of people coming together for a common cause. But this wasn't charity. This was exploitation. The moment of truth came when Jordan was invited to take the stage. The gala had reached the part of the program where the big donations were to be announced, and the charity leaders had hoped Jordan's presence would inspire more contributions. The crowd applauded as he made his way to the microphone. But instead of sticking to the usual script, giving his thanks, smiling for the cameras, Jordan stood still for a moment, collecting his thoughts. The energy in the room shifted. Those who had been applauding now waited in silence, unsure of what to expect. For years, Michael Jordan had been the face of positivity and determination. His name was a symbol of excellence, and his career had been built on his relentless pursuit of greatness. But the man standing at the microphone now was no longer just the athlete. He was a man whose name had been used to deceive people, and he couldn't allow it to continue. He couldn't allow this charity to use him, his name, and his influence to take advantage of good-hearted people who believed in what they were supporting. I've been sitting here tonight listening to these speeches, listening to promises about what we're doing for the kids, Jordan began, his voice steady but filled with intensity. And I want to tell you all something. I've been a part of this charity for years, and I believed in the work they were doing. But after everything I've seen tonight, I can't stand by any longer. The room fell silent. The tension was palpable. For a moment, no one knew what to do. Jordan's words weren't scripted. They weren't rehearsed. They were raw, and they cut straight to the heart of the issue. The truth is, he continued, the money you've been donating, the money that you think is going to help kids in need, it's not. It's being misused. The people running this organization are taking that money for themselves. They're living the high life while the kids they promised to help are being forgotten. There was a collective gasp from the audience, followed by murmurs and whispers. The charity leaders, who had been smiling and nodding just moments before, were now visibly shaken. Some attempted to speak, to justify their actions, but Jordan wasn't finished. I didn't come here tonight to make a scene, Jordan said, his voice growing more forceful. But I can't sit back and let this continue. This organization is using my name and my influence to deceive people, and I won't be part of that. I'm here to expose the truth, to make sure you know where your money is really going, and to make sure the kids who were promised help actually get it. The room was in chaos. Some of the attendees looked to the charity leaders for answers, while others turned to Jordan for support. This wasn't the ending anyone had expected for such a well-publicized event. The organizers scrambled to regain control, but it was too late. Jordan's words had already done their damage. The damage wasn't just to the reputation of the charity, it was to the image of charity fundraising itself. What Jordan had just done was more than expose a lie, he had set a precedent. In that moment, Michael Jordan had not only confronted a fraudulent organization, he had also reshaped the conversation about accountability and philanthropy. As the event ended, the fallout was immediate. News outlets reported on the stunning turn of events, and social media exploded with reactions from people around the world. Some supported Jordan, praising him for his bravery in calling out the charity. Others questioned the timing, the public nature of his actions, and the impact it might have on the future of charitable events. But for Jordan, none of that mattered. He had done what he knew was right, no matter the consequences. The truth had to come out. And in that moment, Michael Jordan wasn't just the basketball legend the world knew him to be, he was a man standing up for integrity, using his voice to make sure the right thing was done. He had confronted corruption head-on, and no matter the fallout, he knew he couldn't turn his back on the truth. Michael Jordan's unexpected confrontation at the charity event sent shockwaves throughout the basketball world and beyond. The media frenzy that followed was immediate, with news outlets reporting on the shocking turn of events. Jordan, who had long been seen as a hero, both on and off the court, had just taken a bold stand that shook the very foundations of charitable fundraising. His actions would become a pivotal moment not just in his career, but in the broader conversation about accountability in the world of philanthropy. The story quickly became a global topic. News channels, radio stations, and social media platforms exploded with reactions. Some celebrated Jordan for his courage in exposing the truth, while others criticized him for publicly airing out the charity's issues. It was clear that no matter which side of the argument people fell on, Jordan's decision to confront the charity's leadership on live television had made a lasting impact. In the days following the event, Jordan found himself in the midst of a media storm. Journalists bombarded him with questions, eager to understand why he had taken such a drastic step. The public was split. Some praised him as a hero, someone who stood up for what was right and used his influence to make a difference. Others, however, saw his actions as a betrayal of the charity's supporters and the donors who had contributed to the cause under the assumption that their money was going toward a noble effort. The basketball world reacted similarly. Former teammates and coaches weighed in on the situation. Some were full of admiration for Jordan's decision to call out the charity for its wrongdoing, recognizing that it took immense courage to publicly criticize an organization that had once relied on his name to raise money. Others were more reserved, wondering whether there could have been a more tactful way to address the issue without creating such a public spectacle. In an exclusive interview with a major sports network, Jordan explained his actions. "I didn't come to the event with the intention of causing a scene. I came because I believed in the mission and the idea of helping kids who needed support. But when I saw the lies being told, when I saw the misuse of funds, I couldn't just sit there. I had to stand up for what's right." Jordan was quick to defend his position, explaining that he had always been committed to giving back. "I've spent my career trying to do more than just play basketball," he said. "But when people take advantage of my name, when they misuse the trust of the public, that crosses a line. It's not just about basketball, it's about doing the right thing. And sometimes that means speaking out, even when it's hard." While Jordan's words were widely acknowledged, the charity's leaders weren't so easily swayed. In the aftermath of the event, they issued a statement defending their actions, claiming that there had been misunderstandings about the way the funds were being used. They blamed the media for distorting the truth and vowed to clear up the situation. But the damage was already done. The public perception of the charity had been irreparably altered. As the weeks passed, investigative reporters began digging deeper into the charity's financials. What they uncovered was damning. Reports revealed that a significant portion of the funds raised in Jordan's name had been diverted to cover the extravagant lifestyles of the charity's leaders. While the charity had promised to support underprivileged children in Chicago, it was clear that very little of the money had actually gone to those in need. Instead, the funds had been used for lavish dinners, expensive travel, and luxury items for those at the top of the organization. The revelation sent shockwaves through the media, confirming Jordan's allegations and further tarnishing the charity's reputation. In the midst of all this, Jordan remained resolute. Despite the fallout, he stood by his decision. "I did what I had to do," he told a reporter during a post-event interview. "I'm not here to play games. I'm here to help kids, and if that means exposing the truth, then that's what I'm going to do." But not everyone shared Jordan's view. A segment of the public remained critical of his approach. Some argued that Jordan had done too much damage to a cause that, at its core, was still trying to help children. These critics believed that Jordan should have approached the situation privately, giving the charity a chance to address the issue behind closed doors. Others pointed out that Jordan's dramatic confrontation had undermined the integrity of charitable events in general, casting a shadow over future fundraising efforts. Yet, amid the criticism, there were those who felt that Jordan's actions had brought attention to a much-needed issue in the charitable world: transparency. Many organizations, especially those with large donations coming from high-profile individuals, had long operated in the shadows, with little accountability for how funds were spent. Jordan's confrontation had forced a much-needed conversation about the importance of ensuring that the money being raised was actually going toward the intended cause. The media landscape became a battleground for opinions. Newspapers published editorials both praising and condemning Jordan's actions. On one side, there were those who lauded his courage and willingness to expose the truth, seeing him as a champion of integrity. On the other, there were those who believed Jordan's public outburst had done irreparable damage to an organization that had good intentions, despite its failures. The debate was fierce, and it seemed to divide not only the public but also those within the world of philanthropy. Charitable organizations began to take note. In the wake of the scandal, many began to reconsider their own practices and adopted stricter guidelines for financial transparency. It became clear that Jordan's actions had started a ripple effect, one that would force charities to be more accountable to their donors and supporters. Several organizations publicly commended Jordan for his stance, saying that his courage had inspired them to do more to ensure their funds were being spent effectively. Meanwhile, Jordan himself continued to focus on his own charitable work, which, despite the controversy, remained grounded in his commitment to helping youth. He knew that his actions, while controversial, had shone a light on an issue that had long been swept under the rug. And, in the end, that was what mattered most to him. His reputation as a basketball player had already been cemented, but now, his legacy was also being shaped by his willingness to speak up for what was right, regardless of the personal or professional costs. In the weeks following the event, Jordan turned his attention to launching his own initiative to support underprivileged youth in Chicago. He made sure to emphasize transparency in this new venture, making sure the money raised would go directly to the kids who needed it the most. This effort became the cornerstone of his post-basketball life, proving that his desire to help others was genuine and unwavering, regardless of the challenges that arose. The fallout from the charity scandal might have been uncomfortable, but it ultimately had a lasting positive impact. Jordan's decision to stand up for what was right sent a message to the world that no amount of fame, money, or power could silence the truth. His willingness to confront corruption in the charitable world solidified his legacy not just as a sports icon, but as a man of integrity, committed to doing good and ensuring that the next generation would benefit from the opportunities he had fought so hard to create. In the end, Michael Jordan wasn't just remembered for his unmatched athleticism or his championship rings. He was remembered as someone who stood for something greater: honesty, transparency, and the pursuit of a fairer world for those who had the least. After Michael Jordan's shocking confrontation at the charity fundraiser, the consequences were immediate and far-reaching. The public fallout from his live TV intervention was swift and dramatic, but it was the legal ramifications that soon became the primary focus. What had begun as a moment of righteous indignation in front of a live audience now spiraled into a full-scale investigation into the charity's practices. For Jordan, it was clear that there was no turning back. He had exposed the truth, and now it was time to hold those responsible accountable. In the wake of Jordan's announcement, the charity's leadership scrambled to contain the damage. What had been an organization basking in public goodwill just hours before now found itself in crisis mode. The media quickly turned its focus on the allegations of fraud, questioning how a charity with such high-profile backers had allowed such blatant mismanagement to occur under their watch. As the charity leaders began to make defensive statements, the public grew more skeptical. Jordan's words had hit a nerve, and it was impossible to ignore the growing pile of evidence that suggested something deeply corrupt had been happening behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, investigators began to dig into the charity's financial records. The charity's leadership had, for years, boasted about how much money they were raising for underprivileged youth. However, when auditors began to look closer, a different picture emerged. Money that was intended for programs and services aimed at supporting children was instead being funneled into salaries, personal expenses, and extravagant travel. Some of the charity's leaders were revealed to have been living luxuriously, even while the kids they promised to help continued to live in poverty. As the investigation ramped up, Jordan found himself reluctantly becoming a key figure in the case. Though he had been the one to bring the issue to light, he was now facing questions from every direction. Legal experts, journalists, and the public all wanted to know what role, if any, Jordan had played in allowing the charity to operate unchecked for so long. Despite his clear commitment to the cause, some skeptics questioned whether he should have known more about what was happening with the funds raised in his name. For Jordan, the legal scrutiny was uncomfortable. He had always prided himself on being meticulous and focused, but now, as the legal complexities of the case unfolded, he was forced to confront a situation that was much bigger than basketball. He had learned long ago that with fame came responsibility, but the scale of this situation was unlike anything he had faced before. His name, his reputation, and his legacy were now directly tied to an issue of corruption and fraud. Jordan took immediate action, deciding to cooperate fully with investigators. He knew that the charity's leaders had used his name to bolster their cause, and he was committed to making sure they were held accountable for their actions. In a series of interviews with both law enforcement and legal teams, Jordan explained his role with the organization and how he had been misled. He made it clear that he had trusted the charity, believing that they were doing the right thing by using his name to help underprivileged youth. He had no idea that the charity had been taking advantage of his goodwill. His willingness to cooperate was commendable, but it didn't stop the barrage of criticism that followed. Critics argued that Jordan should have been more vigilant in overseeing how his name was being used. They questioned why, after years of endorsing the charity, he hadn't known about the misuse of funds. On the other side, supporters defended Jordan, pointing out that the fault lay with the charity's leaders, not with him. They emphasized his long history of charitable efforts and how, despite this setback, Jordan had done more for the community than most. The media continued to focus heavily on Jordan's involvement in the case, and with each new development, his image was increasingly scrutinized. The legal system, too, became involved as investigations into the charity's leadership escalated. Several members of the charity's board were arrested, and charges of embezzlement, fraud, and misappropriation of funds were brought against them. As the case moved forward, the once glamorous charity organization collapsed under the weight of its own lies. For Jordan, the impact of the scandal went far beyond the public perception of him. Though he had taken the first step toward exposing the truth, the aftermath was personally taxing. He was still dealing with the fallout from the public's mixed reactions to his actions, but the deeper questions of accountability and his own involvement weighed heavily on him. Throughout his career, Jordan had always been in control, on the court, in his business dealings, and even in his charitable work. But now, he had to come to terms with the fact that even his best intentions could be clouded by the actions of others. Jordan's legal team advised him to distance himself from the ongoing investigation, but Jordan felt a strong personal duty to see it through. He had taken a stand, and now, he wanted to make sure that the kids the charity had promised to help wouldn't be forgotten in the process. The legal proceedings would take time, but Jordan was committed to seeing that the people responsible for misappropriating funds would face consequences for their actions. As the case progressed, Jordan's name continued to appear in headlines. Some framed him as a hero who had exposed a corrupt system, while others questioned why it had taken a public confrontation for him to get involved. Yet, despite the criticism, Jordan maintained his focus. He made a public statement acknowledging the difficult lessons learned throughout the process. He admitted that, while he could never have known the extent of the corruption, he had learned the importance of accountability in every aspect of his life. He reiterated his commitment to supporting youth in need, and vowed to ensure that future charitable organizations he partnered with would be thoroughly vetted. Eventually, the charity's leaders were convicted of fraud and embezzlement, and the organization was dismantled. The funds that had been misappropriated were returned, and a new, more transparent charity emerged to take its place. Jordan used his influence to ensure that the new charity was set up with strict oversight and accountability measures in place. Despite the challenges he faced, Jordan's involvement in the scandal became an important chapter in his post-basketball career. It showed that, even after retiring from the game, his influence and integrity mattered. His actions not only exposed corruption but also forced the charitable world to reconsider how it operated. He had made a difference, not just by playing basketball, but by using his voice to fight for what was right. Looking back, Jordan would reflect on the difficult lessons learned. He realized that, while he could never control the actions of others, he could always choose how to respond. By standing up for what was right, Jordan had proven that even in the face of controversy, his values, integrity, transparency, and accountability would always guide him. The legal and personal repercussions of his decision were significant, but they ultimately solidified his legacy as not just one of athletic greatness, but also of moral courage. The scandal, though painful, marked a turning point in Jordan's life, one that would define his legacy off the court. It was no longer just about basketball, it was about standing for what was right, no matter the personal cost. As the dust settled from the legal battle, Jordan emerged stronger, committed to continuing his work for the community and ensuring that his name would be associated with causes that truly made a difference. The night of the charity fundraiser was supposed to be a celebratory occasion, an evening where the city of Chicago and its philanthropic community could come together to make a real difference in the lives of children in need. Celebrities, influencers, and well-known public figures had all shown up to contribute to the cause, and everything was going according to plan, until Michael Jordan stepped onto the stage. The charity gala, broadcasted live across multiple networks, had been carefully orchestrated for months. The goal was clear: raise as much money as possible for underprivileged youth in Chicago. It was an event filled with energy, excitement, and a sense of purpose. The crowd was eager to hear from Jordan, the keynote speaker, who had been at the center of the event's promotion. His presence alone promised to bring in significant donations, as his name and image were synonymous with success, generosity, and sportsmanship. Jordan had been an active supporter of charities for years, especially those focused on helping youth through sports, education, and community programs. He had long believed that success wasn't just about personal achievements, it was about giving back. His involvement in this particular charity had been positioned as a way to help underprivileged kids in Chicago, providing them with opportunities they might otherwise never have. But as the event unfolded, Jordan's mind began to race. The speeches from the charity's leaders were filled with flowery words about hope, opportunity, and future plans for growth. They spoke about how their programs were reaching thousands of kids, changing lives, and making a difference. But as Jordan sat in the audience, listening to the promises being made, he began to notice the cracks in the facade. He had seen it before, the grand speeches, the emotional appeals, but this time, something felt off. He knew the truth wasn't as it was being portrayed. Jordan had been involved with the charity for years, endorsing it and helping raise funds through his star power. He had trusted the leadership and believed that they were genuinely making a difference. But over time, whispers had reached his ears. People in his inner circle had begun to question the transparency of the charity's operations. The money raised didn't seem to be reaching the kids it was meant to help. Some had even gone as far as to suggest that funds were being misused, funneled into personal expenses of the charity's leadership rather than used to support the programs for which they were intended. As the speeches continued, Jordan couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his gut. He glanced around the room at the lavish decorations, the expensive wine, the rich donors eagerly raising their paddles to bid on auction items. There was a clear disconnect between the promise of helping underprivileged children and the luxury surrounding the event. The charity was operating in the shadows of wealth, while the very children they claimed to help continued to struggle in the streets of Chicago. By the time the moment came for Jordan to take the stage, his suspicions had turned to certainty. As he stood to walk toward the microphone, he knew that he could no longer stay silent. The voice of the man who had built his career on hard work, integrity, and dedication was about to make a statement. The audience cheered, expecting a standard speech filled with gratitude and encouragement. But Jordan had other plans. He paused at the podium, looking out over the crowd. The cheers quieted down, and the room fell into a heavy silence. Jordan had always been able to command attention on the basketball court, but this moment was different. This was not a game, and the stakes were far higher than any championship. This was about truth. "I've been sitting here tonight listening to all of these speeches," Jordan began, his voice calm but resolute. "And I'm here to tell you that I can't just sit back and pretend everything is okay." The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something was off. The charity's leaders, sitting at the front of the room, exchanged nervous glances. Jordan paused again, taking a deep breath before continuing. "The truth is," Jordan said, his words ringing out clearly across the room, "the money you've all donated tonight, the money you thought was going to help kids, none of it is getting to them. It's being misused. The funds that you've trusted are being taken by people at the top. They're using my name, my reputation, to collect donations for their own benefit. I won't stand for it." A collective gasp rippled through the room. For those in the audience who had been unfamiliar with the whispers and rumors, the revelation was shocking. The charity, which had built its entire fundraising model around the trust placed in Jordan, was being exposed for its corruption. The leaders of the organization, who had been smiling moments earlier, now sat frozen, their faces pale with shock and disbelief. Jordan's decision to call out the charity on live television was not just a bold statement, it was an act of courage. In that moment, he was not just Michael Jordan, the basketball legend, he was Michael Jordan, the man who had invested years of his life into charitable causes and refused to let his name be used to perpetuate a lie. His stance was a clear message to those who thought they could manipulate the system for personal gain. There were consequences. The charity leaders tried to interrupt, offering half-hearted apologies, but Jordan wasn't having it. He wasn't there to listen to their excuses, he was there to set the record straight. "I'm not here to play games. I'm not here to let people get away with this," he continued. "When I put my name on something, it means something. And it's clear that what's been happening here is wrong. I'm telling you all now, this has to stop. I will make sure that the truth comes out, no matter what." As Jordan's words hung in the air, the camera crew, initially prepared to cut to the next segment, lingered. The broadcast had taken an unexpected turn, and the faces in the crowd were filled with a mixture of disbelief and anticipation. The charity's representatives, now visibly sweating, struggled to maintain control of the situation. But it was clear that Jordan had seized the moment, and the audience was hanging on every word. The rest of the night was a blur. Jordan's bold statement reverberated across news outlets, social media platforms, and the sports world. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, the media was flooded with reactions. Analysts, journalists, and sports personalities all weighed in, offering their take on Jordan's dramatic move. Some praised him for his integrity and courage in exposing the charity's fraudulent activities, while others questioned the timing and whether it could have been handled differently. The fallout was immediate, but one thing was certain: Jordan's decision had made waves, and the world was paying attention. The charity, now in disarray, issued a statement the following day, claiming that the accusations were false and that they would work with authorities to clear their name. However, the damage was already done. Donations began to dry up, and public confidence in the organization plummeted. Investigations were launched, and soon, the charity's leadership was under intense scrutiny. As the legal and financial repercussions unfolded, Jordan's decision to stand up for what was right began to take shape as not just an act of bravery but as a defining moment in his post-basketball career. For Jordan, the victory wasn't just in exposing the truth, it was in using his platform to ensure that future charitable efforts would be held to higher standards of accountability. He had used his voice not just for sports, but for social justice, reminding the world that integrity and transparency were values worth fighting for. His actions would forever be linked to the battle against corruption and charitable organizations, making this moment one of the most significant of his life. As the charity's leaders scrambled to recover from the scandal, Jordan's role in the story was clear. He had been more than just a player. He had been a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves, a protector of the trust placed in charitable causes. The world had seen a new side of Jordan that night, one that would continue to define his legacy long after he hung up his basketball shoes. The world had barely recovered from the shock of Michael Jordan's live TV confrontation when a media storm hit. Jordan's decision to publicly call out a charity using his name for fraudulent purposes was not just headline news, it was a cultural event. News outlets scrambled to cover the story from every angle, while social media exploded in response. What had started as a charity event for underprivileged youth had turned into an international scandal. For Jordan, the reaction was both overwhelming and bittersweet. He had always been a figure in the public eye, but this felt different. This wasn't about his basketball achievements or endorsement deals. It was about his integrity, his willingness to stand up for what was right, even when it meant challenging an entire organization that had used his name for personal gain. His actions resonated with some, while others began to question whether he had overstepped his boundaries. What was clear, however, was that Jordan had changed the narrative on philanthropy and public accountability. The first wave of reactions came from the media. Television networks replayed Jordan's mic drop moment in slow motion, analyzing his every word. News anchors across the country discussed the implications of Jordan's actions. Some praised him for exposing the charity's corruption, calling his decision a brave and necessary step to ensure that charitable donations were being used properly. Jordan takes the mic in the fight for integrity to the airwaves, one headline declared. Others, however, took a more critical tone, questioning whether his public confrontation was the right way to handle the issue. Did Jordan go too far? Was the headline on another network. Critics argued that Jordan could have addressed his concerns privately, without creating such a public spectacle. Social media reactions were just as polarized. Fans flooded Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram with messages of support, applauding Jordan for putting the truth ahead of his own image. MJ does it again, this time off the court, one tweet read. Many social media users shared stories of their own experiences with charity scams, voicing their frustrations about the lack of transparency in nonprofit organizations. Jordan's intervention had given them a platform to share their own grievances, and they rallied behind him as a symbol of justice. But not everyone was on Jordan's side. Some high-profile figures in the charitable sector began to distance themselves from the fallout. Several well-known philanthropists and charity heads voiced their concerns about the impact of Jordan's actions on future charitable efforts. They argued that Jordan's public exposure of the charity's misdeeds might discourage people from donating to causes in the future. "We should be supporting charity, not tearing it down," one prominent charity leader said in an interview. The concern was that Jordan's confrontation could damage public trust in all charitable organizations, even those doing legitimate work. Jordan, for his part, was resolute. "I didn't do this for the headlines," he said in an exclusive interview with a major news network. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. We need to be better as a society when it comes to how we hold organizations accountable. If I had known about this earlier, I would have stepped in sooner. But now that I know, I couldn't sit back and let it continue." Jordan's sincerity and transparency in the interview seemed to strengthen the perception that he had acted out of a genuine desire to help, not to damage the reputation of the charitable sector. As the media continued to report on the incident, the charity at the center of the controversy went into damage control mode. Their leadership, initially caught off guard by Jordan's public condemnation, issued a statement defending their actions. They argued that the misuse of funds was a misunderstanding and promised to correct the situation. They vowed to cooperate fully with authorities and claimed they had already begun implementing stricter financial controls. However, the damage had been done. Public trust in the charity had evaporated, and donations began to dry up almost immediately. Investigators soon became involved, and the media shifted its focus from Jordan's public call-out to the charity's internal practices. What followed was a series of explosive revelations. Reports began to surface showing that a significant portion of the funds meant for children's programs had been diverted into the pockets of the charity's leaders. Lavish expenses, including international travel, luxury dinners, and personal purchases, had been paid for with donations intended for at-risk youth. Internal documents and leaked emails confirmed that the leadership had knowingly misled donors and used Jordan's endorsement to maintain their image of legitimacy. For Jordan, this was both a vindication and a reminder of how deep the problem ran. He had suspected the worst, but the reality of the charity's corruption was far worse than he had imagined. As the investigation unfolded, Jordan continued to lend his full support to the authorities, providing them with any information that could help expose the full extent of the wrongdoing. Though the legal ramifications were far-reaching, Jordan remained publicly steadfast. His stance only became clearer as the media storm continued to rage. "I'm not here to destroy charity," he stated in a follow-up interview. "I'm here to make sure that when people donate to causes, their money goes where it's supposed to. We can't allow people to exploit others under the guise of doing good." Despite his firm stance, some public figures and charity organizers remained critical of Jordan's timing. In the weeks following the confrontation, several high-profile donors, including corporate sponsors who had supported the charity, pulled their backing. They feared being associated with the scandal and were concerned that Jordan's actions might create a broader distrust of charitable initiatives in the future. Some even argued that Jordan's public intervention had inadvertently hurt the very kids the charity aimed to help by diverting attention from the work being done on the ground. A prominent sports commentator wrote, "Jordan's crusade for transparency has merit, but the question remains, did he have to go public like this? Could this have been handled privately?" The debate about the right approach to handling such situations quickly became a central topic in both the media and in the world of charity. Many believed that Jordan's confrontation, while bold, was a necessary catalyst for change. However, others cautioned that there needed to be a more constructive way to ensure that organizations acted ethically, without the need for public shaming. The charity eventually disbanded, and the heads of the organization were placed under investigation. Charges of embezzlement and fraud were brought against several members of the board. Jordan, who had helped to shine a light on the organization's wrongdoing, became a central figure in the legal proceedings, though he was never directly implicated in any wrongdoing. Instead, he was lauded for his efforts to protect the interests of the children the charity had promised to help. Jordan's role in the scandal became a critical part of his post-basketball legacy. While many had always admired him for his skill on the court, his decision to call out the charity took his legacy to new heights. He had once been the symbol of athletic greatness, but now, he was being remembered as a man of integrity, someone who, when faced with injustice, was unafraid to act, even at the risk of his own reputation. Despite the media chaos and the fallout from the scandal, Jordan's personal reflections were marked by a sense of purpose. He knew that this moment would define his legacy in a way that his basketball achievements never could. Standing up for what was right, no matter the consequences, had been a defining theme throughout his life, on and off the court. His actions sent a clear message that he would not tolerate the misuse of his name, nor would he allow the exploitation of vulnerable children for personal gain. Jordan had once again used his platform for something larger than himself, and in doing so, had sparked an important conversation about transparency, accountability, and the true meaning of philanthropy. In the end, Michael Jordan's decision to call out the charity wasn't just about exposing fraud, it was about ensuring that the next generation of philanthropists, athletes, and public figures understood the importance of responsibility. His actions reverberated far beyond that one event, encouraging others to demand more from the organizations they supported and ensuring that charity would always be about the people it was intended to help.